This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. 5 years ago this weekend, the Wall Street giant Lehman Brothers collapsed, triggering the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. At the time, Lehman was the fourth largest bank on Wall Street. It collapsed under the weight of subprime mortgage-backed securities tied to the crumbling U.S. housing market. 5 years after the financial crisis began, millions are still suffering, but Wall Street is not. While next week marks the second anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, the divide between the 1% and the 99% is as great as ever. According to one recent study, the top 1% has captured about 95% of the income gains since the recession ended. Meanwhile, the top 10% of earners last year took more than half the country's total income, the highest level recorded since the government began collecting relevant data a century ago. Today, we're joined by former Secretary of Labor and renowned economist Robert Reich. He's the focus of a new film called Inequality for All.
Now, the thing you ought to know about this Mini Cooper is it is small. We are in proportion, me and my car. My name is Robert Reich. I was Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. Before that, the Carter administration. Before that, I was a special aide to Abraham Lincoln. Of all developed nations, the United States has the most unequal distribution of income, and we're surging toward even greater inequality. 1928 and 2007 become the peak years for income concentration. It looks like a suspension bridge.
Last year, we made $36,000.
I probably make $50,000 a year, working 70 hours a week.
The middle class is struggling. People occasionally say to me, what nation does it better? The answer is the United States. In the decades after World War II, the economy boomed, but you had very low inequality.
Do you know Robert Reich?
I do indeed.
He's a communist.
When I was a kid, bigger boys would pick on me. I think it changed my life. I had to protect people from the people who would beat them up economically. Who is actually looking out for the American worker? The answer is nobody. Workers don't have power if they don't have a voice. Their wages and benefits start eroding. We are losing equal opportunity in America. Any one of you who feels cynical, just consider where we have been.
The trailer for the new film Inequality for All, featuring Robert Reich. It opens in theaters September 27th. Robert Reich joins us here in New York. He served as Labor Secretary under President Lincoln, now a professor at the under President Clinton, and is now a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Time magazine named him one of the 10 most effective cabinet secretaries of the last century. He's written 12 books, including Aftershock, The Next Economy and America's Future, and Beyond Outrage, expanded edition, What Has Gone Wrong with Our Economy and Our Democracy and How to Fix It. Welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you.
Amy. You know, I'm getting so old that my students really do believe that I was a special assistant to Abraham Lincoln. Those were tough years, I tell them, and they stopped getting the joke.
They've heard of Abraham Lincoln.
They have heard of Abraham Lincoln. That's right.
So you're a good teacher then.
But look, they don't have, my students who are very idealistic and they do want to change the world, they in their lives don't have very much of a memory of government or even of the society that we are part of expanding equal opportunity, changing the structure of power. I mean, you know, they don't remember, as I do, the 1960s.
Let's talk about this fifth anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the beginning of the recession, and who has profited in this last 5 years. It has certainly not been bad for everyone.
Oh, no. In fact, Emmanuel Saez, my colleague at Berkeley, who has really done the pioneering work on determining who's got what and looked at income tax records, he's just come out with a new study showing that since the recovery, almost all the gains have gone to the very, very top. People who are in the top 1% are doing better than they did even before the Great Recession, better than they have done since 1928. Remember what happened after 1928. We had a great crash. Remember what happened after 2007, which was the last peak in terms of inequality. We had another crash. We can get back to why there's a relationship there. But most Americans are on a downward escalator. The median wage in the United States, adjusted for inflation, keeps on dropping.
You use the image of a suspension bridge to talk about inequality in the film.
Because up until this new study shows that 2012 actually is the new peak. The old peaks were 1928 and 2007, which is interesting because in 1929 and 2008 we had crashes. And I think it's not coincidental, because when so much of the nation's income and wealth go to the top, the rest simply don't have the purchasing power to keep the economy going at full employment.
Talk about what's happened to everyone else.
What's happening to everybody else is not only wages eroding and a very large number of discouraged workers who basically are never going to be able to find jobs, but economic insecurity. Most Americans today, even if they have jobs, even if the jobs pay fairly well, are much more insecure than Americans have ever been at work before, at least in living memory, because we have a huge number of contingent workers, huge number of part-time workers, huge number of workers who can't know what their paychecks are going to be because they're paid on a contingency fee, bonuses, working hours, billable hours. That means that they cannot plan and have to live to some extent from paycheck to paycheck. That insecurity, Amy, coupled with declining wages, coupled with more and more concentration of income and wealth at the very top, has led to a an economy that is very vulnerable, and a democracy that is also very vulnerable, because all of that money at the top is being transformed into political power every day.
Political power. I want to refer to Syria right now. It's something you also have written about, Syria and the reality at home in America. Aside from the moral and the strategic arguments against the war or a strike on Syria by the United States, can you simply talk about what the costs of war mean?
Well, every time the United States has got into this tinderbox of the Middle East, for reasons that we can debate whether it's good or not, there have been ancillary, let's call them ancillary consequences. I mean, civilians are killed. You can't prevent civilians from being killed. There is a rise in anti-American sentiment. There is a rise in terrorism. We deflect attention from what's going on here in the United States in terms of widening inequality, what needs to be done here in America. We use resources that could otherwise be used on our poor, on infrastructure, on education. I am old enough to remember Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty and the Great Society ending on the shoals of Vietnam. Another civil war, in effect, where we were told exactly what, ironically, John Kerry is saying about Syria. American resolve is at stake. Our credibility is at stake. If we don't do this, our enemies are going to be emboldened. He's using the same words, ironically, that were used by McNamara in the 1960s, when John Kerry was
Secretary of Defense.
The former Secretary of Defense, when John Kerry was protesting the Vietnam War. I mean, I hope this irony is not lost on Kerry or anybody else.
Chuck Hagel, who opposed the war in Iraq, our current defense secretary, when asked in the Senate what will be the costs of these strikes, because very few people are talking about the actual economic costs, he said something like tens of millions of dollars.
Well, look, these things tend to escalate out of control. We know that. We've been there before. I mean, in living memory of most of us. What Assad has apparently done, and I'm assuming Assad was responsible for the use of chemical weapons, is abhorrent. Absolutely abhorrent. There has to be some world response. But to assume that the United States is the only world's policeman and that missiles are going to actually be the best response, as opposed to economic sanctions or freezing assets or doing any number of things the most powerful economic force in the world can do, that is the United States, I think is the height of folly at this particular point in time.
We're talking to former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. Now, when you were the Secretary of Labor under President Clinton, interestingly, especially in light of the NSA scandal today and how the Obama administration is reeling from all the leaks around the U.S. government spying on Americans, you proposed cutting the CIA budget in half and giving the money to inner-city schools.
I did, and I was making a kind of play on the notion of U.S. intelligence, because I just sat through a briefing where the CIA and the intelligence committee said that they needed more money. And I said, and I was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I was actually quite serious, Amy. I said, if we're really concerned about U.S. intelligence, the most important U.S. intelligence we have are the brains and the capacities of our kids as they face their adulthood and their futures, and we need better schools, particularly in poor communities, and we need to spend a lot of money, and we're spending far more on the wrong kind of intelligence. I didn't get a very positive response, let's put it that way.
We're talking to Robert Reich. He is the subject of a new film. It's called Inequality for All. He teaches now economics at the University of California, Berkeley, was the labor secretary under President Clinton. We'll be back with him in a minute.